Why I Hate the IHRA. Why a Checklist is Not a Theory of Jew Hatred. I hate the IHRA. There, I said it. Not because I oppose fighting anti-Semitism, quite the opposite. The IHRA, short for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, adopted what has become the most widely used working definition of anti-Semitism. Governments, universities, corporations, and Jewish organizations routinely point to it as a standard for recognizing Jew hate. It contains useful examples and identifies behaviors that absolutely should be recognized as anti-Semitic. My problem is more fundamental. IHRA is much better at identifying examples of anti-Semitism than explaining how Jew hatred actually works. It gives institutions a checklist of symptoms without giving them an adequate theory of the disease. How Jew hatred mutates, how libels are constructed, how respectable institutions authenticate them, and how those libels eventually change the way Jews are treated. That is not an academic distinction. It is why a university can adopt IHRA, commemorate the Holocaust, condemn swastikas, and then tolerate an ideological movement that treats Jewish sovereignty as a colonial crime and Zionist students as morally contaminated. An institution can satisfy the definition on paper while participating in the machinery of contemporary Jew hatred in practice. That is the failure I care about. Jew hatred evolves because the societies around Jews evolve. The accusations that carry moral authority in one century may become disreputable in the next, but the recurring need to explain Jews as a problem has proven remarkably durable. For centuries, anti-Judaism attacked Jews primarily as a religious problem. Jews were accused of rejecting the true faith, killing Christ, poisoning wells, using Christian blood, corrupting society, and conspiring against the religious order. Modern racial anti-Semitism changed the terms. The Jew became a biological and racial problem, rootless, parasitic, manipulative, conspiratorial, corrupting, and dangerous to the national body. Today, anti-Zionism attacks Jewish collective existence through the language of peoplehood, nationhood, and sovereignty. Jewish history in the land of Israel is rewritten as foreign intrusion. Jewish self-determination is treated as uniquely suspect. The Jewish state is portrayed not simply as a country capable of wrongdoing, but as something whose existence is itself an injustice. The ideologies are not identical, and history should not be flattened, but the continuity matters. Anti-Judaism attacked Jews through religion. Racial anti-Semitism attacked Jews through race. Anti-Zionism attacks Jews as a people and nation. IHRA contains pieces of this insight. Its examples include denying Jews the right to self-determination, collectively blaming Jews for Israel, and applying certain standards or traditional anti-Semitic imagery to the Jewish state. But it never turns those examples into a coherent explanation of what has happened. It never says clearly enough that anti-Zionism has become one of the principal ideological vehicles through which Jew hatred is expressed in respectable contemporary society. This is not about disagreement with a particular Israeli government decision. Governments make decisions, citizens argue about them, and policies change. The issue here is the systematic denial of Jewish national legitimacy itself, denying Jewish peoplehood, erasing Jewish history in the land, and treating Jewish sovereignty as an inherently immoral project. The old anti-Semite told Jews they did not belong where they lived. The modern anti-Zionist tells Jews they do not belong in the place from which their people originated. The geography changed, the demand did not. Understanding the libel is essential here, because a libel is more than an inaccurate statement. It is a moral accusation that transforms Jews into something dangerous, corrupt, predatory, murderous, or evil. Effective libels rarely need to be invented from nothing. They are often constructed from fragments of reality. Real events are selected, stripped of context, distorted, moralized, and assembled into a much larger accusation. The mechanism is remarkably old: logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos supplies the apparently factual foundation: a war, civilian deaths, checkpoints, military operations, political statements, property disputes, or images of destruction. The underlying facts can be real while the larger story built from them is profoundly dishonest. Ethos supplies authority. Professors, journalists, NGOs, international organizations, activists, celebrities, clergy, and sometimes carefully selected Jews validate the accusation. Their prestige can make a disputed claim feel established before most people have examined it. Pathos supplies the emotional force. Human suffering is placed inside the moral frame, and the audience is no longer simply being asked to understand a conflict. It is being told who the monster is. This is how accusations such as genocide, apartheid, and settler colonialism can function as libels. Their purpose is larger than alleging specific wrongdoing. They establish a moral identity for Israel, not merely wrong, but fundamentally evil. Once that conclusion is accepted, the consequences follow. If Zionism itself has been defined as genocide, colonialism, racism, or apartheid, then dismantling Zionism can be presented as justice rather than the destruction of Jewish self-determination. Excluding Zionists can be described as creating safe spaces. Intimidating them can be called protest. Violence against them can be rationalized as resistance. That is the libel cycle. Libel produces stigma. Stigma creates exclusion. Exclusion creates a permission structure for violence. After the violence comes denial. We already see the earlier stages. Israeli academics are boycotted because they are Israeli. Jewish organizations are required to prove their ideological purity. Jewish students discover that acceptance in political and social spaces depends on repudiating Zionism. Synagogues and Jewish institutions become targets for rage over events occurring thousands of miles away. The critical change occurs when Jews associated with Zionism cease to be people with whom one disagrees and become morally contaminated people from whom decent society is supposed to distance itself. Then, when hostility crosses the line into intimidation or violence, the denial begins. It was not about Jews, it was about Israel, Gaza, Zionism, colonialism, justice. The libel that created the stigma conveniently disappears from the explanation of what followed. This is what IHRA does not adequately teach, and it is why institutions can pass their own anti-Semitism tests while failing Jews in front of them. A university can recognize a swastika because everyone already knows what a swastika means. The harder test is whether it recognizes the ideology telling Jewish students that a central expression of their peoplehood makes them oppressors. A corporation can issue a statement condemning anti-Semitism. The harder test is whether it recognizes a workplace culture in which Jewish employees are expected to denounce Israel to establish their moral acceptability. And a Jewish organization can hold a beautiful Holocaust remembrance ceremony while failing the most important contemporary test of all. Our society has become very good at mourning powerless dead Jews. It remains far less comfortable with powerful living ones. There is something deeply revealing about a culture that solemnly promises never again to Jews who can no longer defend themselves, then recoils when living Jews insist upon the sovereignty and power necessary to make those words meaningful. A checklist cannot explain that contradiction. Modern Jew hatred rarely announces itself as Jew hatred. Successful hatred adopts the moral vocabulary of the society in which it operates. Today, that vocabulary includes human rights, liberation, decolonization, oppression, justice, and international law. Those concepts are not inherently anti-Semitic, but their prestige can give old anti-Jewish accusations new moral authority when they are used to erase Jewish history, deny Jewish peoplehood, and transform Jewish sovereignty into a unique crime. The anti-Zionist does not need to claim that Jews secretly control governments. He can describe an all-powerful Zionist lobby manipulating foreign policy. He does not need to repeat the medieval blood libel word for word. He can portray the Jewish state as deliberately slaughtering children. He does not need to describe Jews as foreign intruders in Europe. He can describe Jews in their ancestral homeland as foreigners who appeared from elsewhere to steal somebody else's country. This is what it means to say that Israel has become the collective Jew. The accusations once directed at Jewish communities migrate onto the Jewish state. Disproportionate power, secret influence, bloodthirstiness, foreignness, tribalism, manipulation, unique guilt. The vocabulary is updated, but the moral architecture remains recognizable. That is what I want a serious framework for contemporary anti-Semitism to teach. Teach the history of the libels and their genealogy. Teach how fragments of truth are transformed into sweeping moral accusations. Teach how authority legitimizes them and emotion spreads them. Teach what happens when repetition turns accusation into stigma, stigma into exclusion, and exclusion into permission. And name anti-Zionism clearly. Do not bury it in an example or treat it as a peripheral phenomenon that occasionally collides with anti-Semitism. Explain how denying Jewish peoplehood and national legitimacy became one of the most effective ways to recycle anti-Jewish ideas after explicit racial anti-Semitism became socially toxic. That is why I hate the IHRA. Not because it is useless, it isn't. I hate it because it is insufficient for the fight we are actually in. It allows institutions to believe that recognizing anti Semitism means recognizing familiar symbols, phrases, and historical tropes, while failing to understand the process by which Jew hatred acquires new language, new authorities, and new moral legitimacy. Jew hatred did not disappear when polite society finally learned that swastikas were bad. It adapted. Our understanding of Jew hatred has to adapt with it. Any serious framework for contemporary anti Semitism must do more than identify yesterday's examples. It must explain today's machinery. And today, that means confronting anti Zionism. If you enjoy my writing, support me by buying my book, Screaming into the Void, available on paperback or Kindle on Amazon.com.